Welcome to It Takes Two.
I'm Clarissa, the couples therapist.
And I'm Charles, the marketing professor, talking shop on relationships, mental health, and
what to expect when starting therapy.
We'll cover the question, how do you know if your therapist is doing a good job or if they're even a good fit for you?
We will also share a fun date idea and connection question you can use with your partner to take your relationship to the next level. So stay tuned till the end.
Okay, Clarissa, let's start with something completely unrelated to this topic, but it is a morbid story that I found fascinating. And the data came out. This is also unrelated to the unrelated topic. Data just came out about what is the most listened to subject on podcasts. It's over 70%, and it's true crime.
Whoa.
Yeah, teaser. This is a true crime story that I'm about to share.
Are people going to need therapy after this?
They might. They might. And it has to do with relationships and marriage. Here we go. Last year, Nancy Brophy, the author of many steamy romance novels, including How to Murder Your Husband, was arrested and convicted of, can you guess?
Murdering her husband.
Murdering her husband, yep. Yep.
This is so wild.
Right? She was married 26 years and shot him in order to cash out on his $1.5 million life insurance plan. It's crazy. More accurately, the story How to Murder Your Husband was actually an essay, which starts out with this, guys. I'm going to read the first few sentences of this essay. It's wild. As a romantic suspense writer, I spend a lot of time thinking about murder and consequently police procedure. After all, if the murder is supposed to set me free, I certainly don't want to spend any time in jail. And let me say clearly for the record, I don't like jumpsuits and orange isn't my color.
She actually did it, though.
She did. Straight to jail. Straight to jail.
What do you think? What do you think happened? Like, did she write that? And she's like a serial killer, where they write their ways, their methods and ways, or did she not know she was going to kill her husband, but then by writing that, she was like, oh, it's actually kind of doable?
No, I think it's the latter. I do think it's the latter. I think you get 26
I almost
years.
feel like that's worse.
I know. No,
okay.
That's fair. I was going to say, I think 26 years of a resentful, loveless marriage. And you are doing exactly what she said, researching police procedure, how you would get away with it. And then
how you would do it, too.
Exactly. Yeah, how you do it. And actually, in the article, it says, in the essay, it highlights 3 different ways to murder your husband: poison, knife, and gun. Yeah.
Oh,
she
my
chose
gosh.
The gun. Yeah, and so I think it just played out in her head enough times, and she probably got to the point where she said, okay, well, either I go to jail, which is better than being married to this guy, which is crazy, or I get away with it and I get $1.5 million risk assessment. I think she went for it.
Shut up.
Yeah. I mean, no history of violence prior to that.
I feel like jail is not worth it. The risk of jail is not worth $1.5 million, because that's jail for life. Like, your life has ended now. Your life is a life in jail now.
Yeah. And
that's not worth $1.5 million.
No way. And I mean, she is older. You know, she's probably at the earliest her 60s. She's probably an older woman.
I wonder if it's one of those situations, though, where maybe they're like super duper religious and she doesn't feel like divorce was an option.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was the next thing I was about to say. It is amazing how strong the conventions of marriage, traditional marriage, are, where people feel like murder is a better option.
Yeah.
Because then society, like, getting away with murder, to clarify, right? Like, she wasn't trying to
she wasn't trying to get caught.
Yeah. She just wanted her husband to go missing. Because then, you know, societally, her friends and family, they'll sympathize with her, and she'll have $1.5 million, and she won't be outcast from her circles and all that.
But I kind of feel like if you write a book called How to Murder Your Husband and then your husband goes missing, that puts a direct target on your back.
Yeah, the jury wasn't getting fooled. This was one of the shortest jury trials ever, less than 2 days before they convicted her.
All they had to do was read her book and then see what happened in the crime scenes, and then they would cross-reference and go, yep, that was her.
Yeah, it's true. And to that point, there is no evidence of her or him. Like, they never found the body. The only evidence they have was her. They have video footage of her driving to where her husband was before he disappeared, and video footage of her driving back. Now, usually that's circumstantial. That wouldn't be enough to convict somebody. But I think because she literally wrote the book on how to murder your husband, the jury's like, straight to jail.
What'd she do with the body?
It didn't say in the article.
That's okay. It's not a true crime podcast.
True crime podcast friends. Fellow podcasters, get on that. Let's see if we can find the body of the late Mr. Nancy.
Oh, gee.
Jeez. Okay, well.
Woof.
On that note, let's head to our disclaimer.
This podcast only provides information. It's not a viable replacement for a therapy session. If you need help or have an emergency, contact your local mental health authority. Our hosts are experts on mental health. Many of our guests are too. This podcast does not provide expert advice. It's just entertainment, baby. Names, dates, and places have changed. This podcast should never replace real therapy.
Welcome back. We are going to talk all things therapy today. And as Clarissa mentioned earlier, you might need therapy after hearing our introductory story. So this is the podcast episode for you. There's so many challenges for people in deciding whether they should go to therapy. There are multiple types. There's tons of different licenses that different therapists hold, which means their training's different, which means the experience for the client is different. It's hard to know what techniques to ask your therapist to use for you, or whether the techniques that they're suggesting are beneficial or helpful to you. And the fact that you have a relationship with your therapist and trying to understand if it's a good fit and if they're doing a good job of providing therapy to you, all those things can make the task of signing up and continuing therapy really daunting and challenging for a lot of people, especially when it's cost prohibitive. If you're investing this kind of money and your insurance doesn't cover it or what have you, it can be very overwhelming. So Clarissa, let's walk through the different types of therapy and the licenses that go along with that.
Yeah, we should title this episode How to Therapy Guide. I don't know.
I love it, yeah.
Guide to Therapy.
101, Therapy 101.
Therapy 101. Yeah. How to therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's start with the different licenses. So when you're looking into starting therapy, you as an individual have your own individual needs and concerns. So I'm going to try and help you understand how to pair it with the right license, essentially. So there's 3 major therapy licenses, and that's the MFTs, MFTs is marriage and family therapists, social workers, and the clinical mental health counselors. So the acronyms for those are LMFT, LCSW, and LCMHC. In some
it's alphabet soup.
Yeah. We're just getting started on the alphabet.
Warmed up on the alphabet soup.
The general rule of thumb is if you're looking for anything relational, the counselor fit for you would probably be an LMFT. Licensed marriage and family therapists are directly trained in relational hours, essentially. Like it is fundamental to them becoming a therapist that they have to work with more than one person in the therapy room, versus with like LSW or LCSWs or LCMHCs, it's not required for their licensure to work with couples or families. So that'd probably be the best fit there. And
that can be kind of confusing because a lot of people view social workers as family therapists because they often are through what's the other acronym? Child protection services.
Mm-hmm.
Usually social workers are part of that band, but those are still two very different licensures.
Yeah. And social workers, their main rule of thumb is they've gotten a lot of training in minority populations and struggling populations. So like they are going to be the people who have the best training in mostly like crisis situations or minority populations where there's a lack of resources or education and things like that. So LCSWs are going to have a lot of expertise in like directing people to resources to better themselves.
So they're more of like an intervention. Like if there's something dramatic or is a crisis that's escalated situation, or a family or individual who needs more than just what they're already using.
I honestly think they are the best ones. And just from my experience in people who are maybe with high validation, high crisis situations, stuff like that, they're really good just because it's like fundamental in their training.
Yeah. And sorry, we had to just bleep that because we can't say unalived, the correct term for it. But now that I've said it, you know what she was referencing.
Yeah. And then LCMHCs are like your classic like mental health, brain science. Like so many of the ones I have worked with have a lot of training in psychology. Like what you think of when you think of psychology is like your brain and how it works and what's going on. And so they have a lot of training in that. The thing with all of them, though, is like, though I say all of this, people can like, it's like choose your own adventure. Like they can start in these realms and then tailor their work to what they actually are passionate about. So some social workers can work with couples if they've gone through the training to do that. And some MFTs work with crisis situations if they've gone through the training to be a good fit for that. And then same with CMHCs. One of my favorite bosses was a CMHC who was very systems theory. Like he went through the training after his license to be specialized in very similar things to what I was specialized in, which being an LMFT. And
systems theory is the LMFT training model.
Yeah, systems theory is like what we learn as LMFTs in grad school.
Right, and that's the whole relationships, how they influence your life and your experience in mental health and all that, yeah?
Yes.
So then this CMHC boss was not trained as an LMFT, but he got the systems training, and that's kind of what he specializes. So yeah, when you say choose your own adventure, each therapist kind of does. You know, I think of some of the therapists in our network that are social workers. A lot of them specialize in eating disorders.
Yeah, a lot. I know a lot that do. Yeah, I've worked with a lot that have.
Yeah, and so that what's the main what's the different approach then? If there are three therapists, a social worker, an LMFT, and a CMHC, they all have specialized in eating disorders. Let's say, is that therapy experience going to be different still between those three different therapists?
I'd probably say yes. Like when I went to school, I was learning about structural family therapy, Bowen systems theory, narrative family therapy, EFT. But then like when some of my counterparts that have like social work licenses went to school, they're learning person-centered therapy, Carl Jung-un. I can't remember his like exact style, but like Alderian therapy, like there's different types that we all learn at school. And like, feminist is another one that like social workers learn, like feminist therapy. there's different styles that we all learn in our schooling. And that's, I guess, like how it ends up differing. And so doesn't mean you can't adopt that afterwards. Like you do kind of have free reign to like make it your own once you are a therapist, but your fundamental is going to come from different places, I guess.
Yeah. And to add to that, there's a credential you're working on, the AA sect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is that open? Is that just an MFT thing, or can anybody
That's
do that?
like,
so what is that first off?
AA sect is the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists.
Oh, so this is beyond even therapists. Like,
yeah, like this could be like educators out of school could be AA sect certified. So it's just a special certification that because I'm a therapist, I can receive the certification. But if somebody was like a teacher, an educator, they could also receive the AA sect certification.
Gotcha. So let's circle back. CMHCs, they're the generalists. They kind of get the overarching psychology,
mental health,
just generalized thing, but they do focus more on the individual. Would that be a safe assumption?
Yeah.
That's a good generalization.
Yeah.
Social workers, underrepresented populations, under-resourced populations, crisis intervention, and then directing them to additional resources.
Yes, but
of course, there's exceptions.
On individual, yeah.
So also focus on individual, though.
Generally.
So MFTs, they are focused on the relationships in an individual's life. So that could be marriage, partners, family, but it also has a historicity as well, correct? Like how previous relationships are influencing the individual now.
Well, that's probably, the historicity is probably like consistent along all licenses, but like you should pull up the definition of systems theory. You might have to like specifically put systems theory MFT or something, but also maybe just systems theory works too.
All right, we're going to go to our ChatGPT AI to ask for a definition of systems theory.
Several paragraphs.
Oh, yeah. I'm just going to tell them to reduce this down. Systems therapy, also known as family systems theory, is a form of psychotherapy that views individuals' issues as a part of a larger interconnected family system. It emphasizes understanding and addressing the relationships and dynamics within a family, rather than viewing problems as isolated to an individual. This approach is particularly effective in dealing with marital conflicts, child and adolescent behavioral issues, and mental health conditions influenced by family dynamics. The therapy aims to bring about change by altering interactions within the family, improving the overall function of both individuals and the family unit.
Yep. Yeah. It's actually, I think, okay, this is like testing me. So I almost want, maybe you should fact check me. Maybe ask chat, how is systems theory connected to cybernetics?
Oh, nice. Systems theory and cybernetics are closely related in their foundational concepts, both focusing on the study of complex systems, their regulation, and feedback mechanisms. Cybernetics, developed in the mid-20th century, is primarily concerned with understanding and defining regulatory and feedback processes in both machines and living organisms. Whoa, this is cool. I'm nerding out on this right now. Okay.
I feel like you would like it.
Yeah. It takes two. It explores how systems self-regulate through feedback loops and how they can be controlled or altered. In cybernetics, a system is seen as a set of interconnected components that communicate with each other. Okay, I'm seeing the connection here. So why did you bring up cybernetics in the context of systems theory?
I was pretty certain that systems theory came from cybernetics. So cybernetics became a thing, and then systems theory emerged from it as more of the focus of like cybernetics type concepts on the living organism of families.
I think this is just so meta that we used AI to define cybernetics for systems anyway.
That's interesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but basically the concept is like an individual is a sum of all its parts. So I am a sum of all my parts and my family and all that. Like one problem that I bring to therapy is like a puzzle piece, and the therapist is trying to understand what all of the other puzzle pieces are, basically, and find them and put them all together to understand the whole problem, the problem as a whole.
Gotcha. So if you were just to quick suggest to someone who wants to sign up for therapy, would you just give a quick rundown of the 3 one more time?
Yes. So the 3 licensures that I'm focusing on are LMFT, LCSW, and LCMHC. The LMFTs are systems theory trained for relationships and individuals, and then the LCSWs are trained in underrepresented populations and minority populations with like lack of resource or like crisis situations. And LCMHCs are the overall mental health focus, generally working with individuals. So if somebody was searching, though, I think the best, if you like some of the breakdown that I already mentioned, then like for sure plug in that license. If you're looking on Psychology Today, there's like filters you can add, like I want to work with an LMFT, so you just like click that button. But also when you're scanning, I actually kind of like the idea of looking for somebody who works with the problem that you're working for, and then looking at what license they have to kind of see like, oh, how would they approach this problem?
Okay, so
that's probably a better way to do it.
So if I have a presenting problem, I should probably begin there and look for therapists who specialize it and then review the licenses.
And that will help you understand maybe how they approach your presenting problem.
Gotcha. All right, so let's talk techniques. Techniques aren't license specific, if I'm not mistaken. So EMDR is one of the most popular ones. You've probably heard of that one. Any licensed therapist can perform EMDR as a technique.
Yeah.
So let's run through some of the techniques and what they do and how an individual would know whether that's what they should try out.
Yeah. And some of these techniques are like with EMDR, that's like something that a therapist has to go and get a like credential in or like a certification in. But some of these we learned in school and there's no like extra certification. So it's just really interesting, like the way it comes about. But first of all, I also wanted to say like the types of like going into like the techniques of therapy or the types of therapy also applies to like who goes to therapy. So when you think of like who goes to therapy, it's individuals, couples, family at a variety of age range. But it's also good to keep in mind that some counselors like to work with certain ages or certain like individual, family, or couple, like all of that applies. And then the way that they approach it is the techniques, which we're going to cover. I'm just going to read, I pulled this list from Psychology Today, and I'm going to tell you, I didn't even write down all of them because I was writing and I was like, I don't want to write all of these. So I'm just going to speed read this. Okay.
All right. Cue the music.
CBT, DBT, ACT, EMDR, mindfulness-based, attachment-based, EFT, IFS, psychodynamic, play therapy, somatic, hypnotherapy, strength-based, person-centered, motivational interviewing, solution-focused, family systems, narrative, Gottman method, humanistic, experiential therapy, existential, feminist, art therapy, integrative, structural family therapy, Gestalt, ERP, Jungian, brain spotting, neurofeedback, Adlerian, ABA, forensic psych, music therapy, schema therapy, ketamine assisted, equestrian. Those are the types that I chose to write down because they're ones that I like know enough about or like many people know about those ones.
So obviously we do not have time to go through all of those, and perhaps we'll do a series of podcast episodes on the most popular.
Yeah,
and I think that if there's enough interest from the audience, we'll dive deeper into a few of these if you're interested.
Yeah, what's cool about this is going to blow people's mind. I don't think that many people actually know this type of information, so it's interesting to share. But all those types of therapy that I mentioned, they all have, so you call them techniques. I would probably say types of therapy, but then many of the ones that I listed, within them, they have interventions. So like with structural family therapy is comprised of like 5 to 6 interventions. But then it's also like a whole vibe of its own, if that makes sense. There's like a vibe to structural family therapy. And then there's like, I don't actually know this number, 5 or 6 interventions that are in structural family therapy that people use. I didn't even use Bowen Systems. I didn't write it down because it wasn't on Psych Today, but that's like one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Also like Strategic. Strategic's like one of my favorite too. Anyway.
So, and you know, I said ChatGPT because I use ChatGPT a lot. Could I type into ChatGPT what some of my challenges are and say, hey, what are some therapeutic techniques that would help me with this, so I can, you know, begin researching them? I just worry that a Google search might just be a bit too broad.
You should try it.
Okay, that's right.
Like Google or like in ChatGPT, maybe don't use techniques. Use what types of therapy would be good for, and then fill in the blank or whatever.
All right, so I asked ChatGPT what types of therapy would be good for depression with somebody who has ADHD. Okay. CBT was the first one it recommended, effective for both depression and ADHD, behavioral therapy, psychoeducation, mindfulness-based therapies, MBCT, MBSR, interpersonal, which is IPT, family therapy or family-focused therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. Oh, I just say that and get like, that was a traumatic experience taking the ACT. Anyway, medication management. Yeah, it's funny. I think this list is all the very basic general ones. Yeah,
but actually, like, there's ones that I had seen, like many of those I saw on Psych Today's list. So it's actually kind of interesting. Well, medication management, not so much, because medication is usually like done by a nurse or a psychiatrist. So that's not necessarily found through Psych Today. But like many of those lists, or those ones off the list, were in Psychology Today. So I guess a good thing that, I guess what that makes me feel is that, sorry, this has gotten way overdue, but it just is like pretty cool to see that they actually pulled stuff that you could probably check a box on Psychology Today if you wanted. Like, you could be like, oh, I really want to work with ACT, which, by the way, I've heard so many good things about acceptance and commitment therapy. I actually have like considered getting a certification in that. But like, if you are like, I like the sound of ACT, I want to look at a therapist who works with that, you can check that box in Psychology Today.
Yeah. Okay, great. Awesome. And obviously you can call and do a lot of consults with therapists for free.
Yes, many therapists do initial consults.
And you can ask them yourself, like, hey, this is my presenting issue, or this is what I want to work on. Here are my goals. What would be the techniques you would suggest or types of therapy? And you can get a good idea. And it's good to shop around.
Yes. A lot of clients in initial consults ask me what types of therapy I use. And I think that if that's something really important to you, then you could ask that question and then even write those down and go home and like research them, or like, you know, later on research it and then see like, oh, I actually really like the sound of that. I'm going to try this therapist.
Love that. Love it. Okay, before we switch gears, let's take a quick break. So how do you know if the therapy techniques that you're doing or using, or the therapist that you are interacting with, is providing quality therapy? Well, there was a study done. Well, I should say 24 studies done with over 20 data sets. It's extremely comprehensive. And they found that the effectiveness of therapy can be measured by 4 factors. The first is placebo with 15%, technique, which is 15%, therapeutic alliance, which is 30%, and individual client factors as 40%. Clarissa, would you break down what each of those mean? Because I don't think a lot of people would understand therapeutic alliance or potentially what individual client factors are.
Yeah. Placebo is placebo. Many people know what that means. That's just that it works because you believe it works, basically, right?
Good summary.
The technique is kind of like what we just talked about, all the types of therapy mixed with like how a therapist enacts that intervention. And then the therapeutic alliance is the relationship between the therapist and the client. How well that relationship is, if it's a good fit, stuff like that. That's considered therapeutic alliance. And then the individual client factors is basically all the things that like differ between individuals. So, or like the client. So this could be like finances, like how well you can pay for therapy or not, like how much your financials or your stress with finances is playing a part, your readiness to therapy. If you're married in like a marriage and a couple, this could be like, how long did you wait to start therapy? Like we've talked about that in past podcasts of like some people wait just a little too long where their problems are already like pretty cemented with like resentment and stuff. So that's like all the things that that are
it's on the client side.
all on the client side, and like some in the client's control, some out of the client's control.
Okay, gotcha. And even though it said 40%, which was the biggest piece of the pie, was individual client factors, the researchers determined that the most predictive factor was actually the therapeutic alliance, which is the relationship that the therapist had with the clients, aka whether it's a good fit. And so having a good therapist fit, really becomes a top priority in how effective your therapy is.
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, that's like when you're shopping around for therapists, I think that's also one of the biggest things that clients are worried about is like, is this going to be a good fit? Am I going to like the person? Stuff like that. The other aspect about the therapeutic alliance is like, how does a therapist approach that relationship with the client? Do they have good boundaries? Do they focus on the client? Like, it's all about that relationship between client and therapist, and there's a lot that even goes into that too.
Yeah, it's personality types, whether you feel like you can relate to your therapist, or maybe you don't want to feel like you can relate to your therapist at all. The individual preference is massive, and that's like, and you know, even the best therapist on the planet, the therapist of other therapists, even,
we're talking Gottman, both Miss Doctors Gottman. I can't remember.
Yeah,
we're talking Esther Perel, Carl Jung-un.
But even getting one of these legends as your therapist, it might not be a good fit. And they themselves would admit that not every client is a perfect fit for them.
Yeah.
And that's good news and bad news. The bad news is you have to shop around. The good news is if it didn't work with one therapist, guaranteed there's probably another one out there that will be a good fit.
Definitely.
And I think that's the temptation of a lot of people who've gone to therapy is they have one bad experience with a therapist and then they think, oh, all therapy's, the same and it's bad and it's not great. And my first therapy experience was with a CMHC, LCMHC, and it was very goals centered. Like, let's set some goals.
Yeah, probably like solution focused.
Very much so. And I didn't like it. It wasn't effective for me. And I felt like the therapist was more about telling me what to do versus really hearing me. And I don't know, the vibe wasn't good. The vibes weren't great. And so it took me about a year after that to really try and look, maybe even longer, maybe even 2 years before I started looking again for a therapist. Fortunately, I did find a good fit, and it has made a world of difference in my experience. So I feel like a lot of clients will potentially echo. People who have gone to therapy would probably echo a similar story. This therapist was good. This therapist not so much. But how can a client know? Because a lot of the times, clients, especially, how can an individual person know or a couple know, especially when their decision-making may be clouded with mental health challenges? I think about how we often don't know what's best for us. And we might think, oh, I want a therapist who just listens to me and those, but really what an individual or couple might need is a therapist who will be a little bit abrasive, who might be a little bit bold and say, hey, cut it out. Like you got to be, a little bit more conflict positive. Yes. And so what would be your advice to somebody who says, I don't know what would make a good fit? What makes a good therapist and what makes a good fit?
Oof. That's hard. Okay, so what makes a good therapist, I think, varies a lot, actually. I think it's like years of experience, and if like your presenting problem aligns with what they typically work with, because sometimes a really, really great therapist working with something that they don't typically work with might not appear very good because it's not like their typical style or whatever. It's how much like they put into their like therapy structure and how much they care about their approach to therapy. There's a lot there, but then I think what makes a good fit is so many things too. Personality. Gosh, I like literally can't. So I guess to like answer your question more directly, I'd say like do your research, honestly. Like I would suggest if somebody was to try and start therapy with me, like Google me. I have socials. I have this podcast. I have so many ways that I market myself and so many ways that you can learn about me on the internet before you come see me to even see if you like my vibe. What if you don't like my voice? What if you don't like the way I look? What if you don't like the fact that I have braces? Like that stuff matters. And what if you don't like my age? Many people don't go to me because I look young or am young. And so there's a lot of things that you can do is like, but it has to be upfront, like your research applied ahead of time. And then if somebody is like, oh, I kind of like the general idea of Clarissa, then schedule an initial consult. It's 15 minutes and it's free. So then you're not spending any money to just see, oh, I really don't like her vibe.
Yeah. And it's worth the investment of doing that research and doing a shopping around. Yeah. Because again, you're going to be investing quite a bit of time and money and potentially your relationships.
Yeah.
And so it does take some effort, and it is 100% worth it because if you just look up the first person and just go with them, it's really a disservice.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially, like you might find one bio on a person. I mean, I'm sure you at least probably read one bio, but I mean, what if that therapist doesn't know a lot about like writing a bio? Like that one bio could actually not be fully representative of them. And so maybe Google them, find out if they have like pieces of work somewhere else.
Yeah. And it's okay to ask your friends and family. I know it seems weird that like, oh, it's taboo to ask. No. Ask around. See if somebody or a friend or family member has a good therapist that they can recommend. It does get a little sticky, like depending on how close you are to that person. But don't worry about that. You can figure that out.
But your therapist will tell you.
Yeah, your therapist will help you out with that. Okay, so client has done the research. They figured out, they've done a phone consult. They've signed up for therapy. What can an individual or couple expect when they go into that first session of therapy?
Ooh, okay. The first session is usually considered an intake or an initial session. And generally, the three things that a therapist is going to be looking for is assessing what the presenting problem is, which includes like the history and the present and everything that's going on. And it's also going to include building rapport with your therapist so that's
that therapeutic alliance, that relationship.
Yeah. Because also sometimes it doesn't, I mean, you're literally telling a stranger about like your deepest, darkest, like vulnerable things. So like sometimes you have to like warm up into that. You might like the overall vibe of a therapist, but you still have to build rapport with your therapist, which generally is on the therapist to guide that building rapport. So you should really just show up like yourself and share what you need to get out of therapy and be honest and vulnerable. And that's all you really need to do. But that's what we'll be focusing on is building rapport.
Can I interject real quick on that? Yeah. Listen, if you're going to therapy, your therapist is judgment free. They don't have any biases. They don't have any preconceived notions. They will not judge you, no matter what deep darkies you're afraid to share. And your therapist can only help you with the information that you provide them. So send it. Just unload.
Get your money's worth.
Don't be shy and reserved and don't have any trepidation. Just get your money's worth. Throw out all of it and your therapy will be better.
I generally, yeah, it really will, because like then it gives the therapist more to work with, which is just awesome. And then I guess the third thing that I would say you focus on your initial your initial session would be the developing treatment goals. So the three that I mentioned: build rapport, assess the problem, develop treatment goals. So what types of things you'll be working on or want to get out of therapy.
I think that's one of the first questions you always ask clients is, why did you come to therapy? And what do you want to get out of therapy?
Yeah, I kind of fluctuate like based on the vibe. But yeah, usually it's like what prompted scheduling therapy is like generally the first question that I ask.
Yeah.
Generally.
It's approachable, but it's good to have that in mind.
Yeah.
You know, it's because if you just go in and you're like, I'm in pain, I don't want to feel pain anymore. Well, sometimes it's like a little bit more to go on.
Yeah. And then there's one thing about the initial session that I also want to bring up, which is like either prior to the session or at the session, you'll also be doing consent forms and all the like paperwork. So there is like things you need to sign with like HIPAA and confidentiality and like agreement to like what the session amount should be, which I think is like called a good faith estimate generally. All of that stuff will be covered at the either prior to your first session or at the first session as well.
That evokes one final question I have about this whole process, and it is, how private is the information that is shared with your therapist? Can they tell anybody? What if you've committed a crime? Like I went to Toys R Us and stole a bunch of toys, and I reveal that to you. What's the privacy policy for therapists?
Yeah, we are mandated reporters. So that means we have to report any abuse or neglect to children, elderly, or vulnerable individuals. We also have to report any serious threat to hurt or harm yourself or somebody else. And then like the way that confidentiality works is like each therapist usually has like some type of clause around like other special factors. So like, for instance, if a therapist is in supervision, then the stuff that you share with a therapist who's like an intern or associate and they're working with the supervisor or under a supervisor's license, that supervisor has access to your information that you're sharing in session. With somebody like me who's fully licensed, some of my confidentiality clauses are that I can do what's called consultation, because it's still really good. Like, I work in private practice just with myself. And so it's still good to like bounce off like with other therapists to like continue to grow. So that's considered a consultation, but consultations are designed to not share any identifying information. So you just talk about more of the concepts or patterns that are going on.
So you might consult another professional who might have some experience with kleptomaniacs like myself, where a kleptomaniac specialist therapist, and you might consult with them, but you won't reveal my name or anything that would.
Correct.
So you won't report me to the authorities if I stole a bunch of toys from Toys R Us.
Technically, no, unless you were like, I don't know, about to harm somebody.
Well, don't worry. The toys are purely for play. No.
But I just also want to say with the structure of therapy, after the first session, well, what I tell my clients, and every therapist is different, but I don't know their system. So mine is, I usually say assessment continues for about 1 to 3 sessions. That for about 3 sessions, I'm still getting to know the client. So I'm still building rapport. I'm still assessing the problem. I'm still developing your treatment goals. And then from like 4 plus on, like those sessions are all about the intervention. So basically helping you get to your treatment goals. At any point after that process or during this process is where we get to like discontinuation or termination of therapy. So some therapy styles do require like a certain number of sessions. Like some models of therapy are very structured and they're like, have a process for like session 1 through whatever, but some don't, and it's more flexible. So that's also something to keep in mind. But generally you go to therapy for however long you want or feel like you need. or feel like you can afford. Like there's a lot of factors. So what I usually tell people is that you're not like you don't have to commit to any number of sessions. At any point you can discontinue or terminate therapy. The difference that I use there is that discontinuing means that you might recontinue. You might actually consider coming back. You just need a pause. And then termination is like, generally we're not going to restart therapy together. So termination might be that you need like a different therapist. I might need to refer out for a different problem. Like I don't work with eating disorders, for example. So eating disorders is definitely something I would refer out. So then I would terminate a therapist or a client, or a client would terminate our work together and then go work with somebody else. Similar if like I'm not a good vibe, like it wouldn't be discontinuing, it'd be terminating for good.
Right. And don't worry to ever do that. Therapists do not take it personally when you say, you know what, this isn't a good fit. Can I get a referral? Yes, absolutely. I'd be happy
Absolutely, because the thing that people don't keep in mind is that it does not hurt our feelings. In fact, you're actually helping us, because if you're not into the therapy or into us, then it's going to be harder on us to try and like mold our therapy to you if it's not a good fit for any type of reason. So it's actually does a service for you, and it doesn't hurt your therapist feeling at all. If anything, it makes them feel better, like feel a bit of relief. Like, I'm glad that you're taking your mental health into your own hands so that we don't make you more stuck. Like, I don't ever want to like continue to harm a client's progress just because they don't want to not leave or something, or hurt my feelings.
Right. And if you do like your therapist, but you aren't liking the direction they're going, you can also give them feedback and say,
yes,
hey, I want to do this instead.
Yes. The thing with it is that, I mean, if your therapist responds negatively to types of things, like, then honestly, maybe they're not a good fit, but generally therapists are trained to hear these types of things. Because if we're teaching you stuff like boundaries, then that absolutely applies to us. Like if we're saying, hey, you should have boundaries, you should speak up, you should be honest, etc., then that also applies to how you are in a relationship with us as a therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up?
No. This is a lot.
Comprehensive. This is a full
how-to therapy guide.
Love it. Well, let's just review real quickly what we covered. We covered the 3 types of licensures. Mm-hmm. We covered about 8,000 different therapy types and techniques. We talked about the effectiveness of therapy being primarily about good fit, but also practice, placebo, and individual factors. And lastly, what to expect in the therapy room. Did I miss anything?
No, but honestly, I do want to put like a little like asterisk to like, maybe I missed something while I was sharing all this information. Like
Sure.
I'm simply sharing from like what my knowledge of the therapy world is. And I think that there's just so many ways that like therapy has evolved over decades that I might not be sharing everything. So if you're a therapist or a client listening to this and you're like, well, what about this? Totally. I maybe missed something.
Throw it in the comments. Let us know.
Totally.
We'd love to, and we'll cover it. If there's something we miss and you want it covered, let us know. We'll make sure
That's a great idea
to add it to our list of topics. Oh, Clarissa, do we have a date idea and connection question for this week?
Let's skip the date idea. That feels a little weird to be like, date idea is to go to therapy. Though I do have clients who go to couples therapy and they go out to dinner after. Like they make like a whole date out of it. So
that's
that
cool.
It's like a little bit of like a ritual, but that's not the date idea. You take this information, you do whatever you want with it. But the connection question is to ask your partner if you've been to therapy. The connection question would be, it doesn't matter, individual or couples therapy, talking about what your experiences with therapy are like and what things maybe you liked or didn't like about therapy, whatever type of experience you've had. And then also, in addition to that, if you've been to therapy, would you go again? Would you go in the present? What's like the future of your therapy experience going to be like? And then if you've never been to therapy, the connection question would be, what's your interest level in therapy? If you were to go to therapy, what would be your goals of therapy, as well as maybe like what barriers or things like hold you back to going to therapy?
Love it. Great questions. Maybe we should have that conversation after this.
Maybe be good.
I'm down. Well, everyone, just remember, for things to get better,
For me and you,
it
It
takes
takes
two. Whoop. Oh. Good night, everybody.